All right, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Kroger. For those of you joining us across Facebook and YouTube and the other platforms, you will notice that I am not in our normal DawgNation World Headquarters studios today. As I was telling our audience, part of our First and 15 a little earlier on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. We've done this show since August of 2015. I have never taken a sick day. I've never been sick. I don't really get headaches. I don't really get colds. Don't get fevers. Don't feel discomfort for the most part. But this is as close to being sick as I've probably ever been. So while nothing will prevent us from delivering this show to you, it seemed like a pretty good idea maybe not to come in studio today, just out of, as they say, the fancy folks say, an abundance of caution to make sure that if I am dealing with a little bit of bug or something like that, that it's not the kind of thing that somebody else is going to be able to catch. So we want to be, good teammates to our teammates. And so that is why I'm at home today. Obviously, that means the show is going to sound and look a little bit different. I hate that. It's not the kind of thing that I enjoy at all. But today, sort of feel like it could not be helped. So we're just going to kind of dive into this. We're going to talk here for a little bit. The show's not going to be super long today, to be completely honest with you, because, listen, I just think that it sort of lends itself to not doing a super long show. So with all that said, there are a couple of stories I want to make sure that we do address. We're going to bring on Jeff Sentell here coming up in a little bit. That's going to be a good thing to do. And then after that, we'll kind of get you rolling into a weekend. I guess we'll also follow here live to see if the Cedric Von Prong Ranger news maybe drops while we're on the show, whether or not he's staying or going. Obviously, this is the day when all of that is kind of announced by the NFL. So we'll obviously be kind of following that a little bit closely. But before any of that, let me just kind of get heavy into this as it relates to some of the Todd Monken stuff that's out there. Now, I told you all, I think one day this week, that I don't really consider myself to be a newsman necessarily. A lot of things that may be news, we don't always talk about on this show, because ultimately what we're trying to find is stuff that's interesting, and news not always interesting. What's interesting is not always news. So while I'm not necessarily a newsman, so to speak, I do read news for a living, because that's how you kind of know what's going on and how you know what's out there to talk about. So with the rumors that are out there as it relates to Todd Monken, I want to give you a little bit of insight right now, a little bit of a deep dive maybe, into how I follow this news and tell you what's kind of on my mind based on what we've heard on this for a moment. Now, let me start here with something that we have already talked about, which is something that Jeremy Fowler, ESPN reporter, said the other day on Twitter. Fowler's kind of a respected guy. ESPN, obviously a gigantic outlet. And I believe Fowler was the first one officially to mention the idea that that Todd Monken could be interested in NFL openings. In fact, let me show this to you on the screen. We showed this the other day. Fowler saying that one college coach I'm hearing that's garnered NFL OC interest from teams this cycle is Georgia offensive coordinator Todd Monken. He's had a successful run on the national champion Bulldogs. He's also a former OC of the Bucks and Browns. So Fowler's pretty prominent voice. Him saying that is certainly significant. And then to make things even more significant, different national reporter, different national outlet kind of has also said the same thing here over the course of the last 24 hours or so. You may have seen Ian Rapaport, obviously works for the NFL Network, NFL.com, along with his colleague Mike Garofalo. They're also kind of citing Todd Monken as a possible candidate to be on Todd Bowles' staff there with the Tampa Bay Bucks. Obviously, Byron Leftwich has been fired from that job. This is Todd Bowles' chance to kind of put his own staff together. And Rapaport, Garofalo kind of reporting here that a guy like Todd Monken could be one of the candidates that the Tampa Bay Bucks consider. Now, let me tell you how I process news like this. And this is, I would say, a good way for any of us to process news. So in a situation like this, I would say that local sources are always more valuable than national sources. So if a guy like Jeremy Fowler or Ian Rapaport says what he says here, it might be true, but we've also seen with some of these national guys sometimes, it's not meant to be a criticism, it's just true. That sometimes they sort of say whatever their sources tell them to say, whether it's true or not, that they're willing to be a kind of a mouthpiece sometimes for whatever thing, because that's what the access they've been granted requires them to do. And I said before, that's not really a criticism of Fowler and Rapaport, but it's sometimes the way in which stuff like this gets done is that there's I think a level of local reporting sometimes that's just far different, far different than the level of national reporting you see in a certain situation like this. However, when it comes to the Monken thing, though, here's what you can't deny. That while guys like Jeremy Fowler and Ian Rapaport have kind of put this out there, hey, maybe Monken goes to Tampa Bay. People close to Georgia thus far, the people that you kind of think of as sort of the local sources on the ground around here, We haven't heard anybody refute this as of yet. And if this was easy to refute, it would have already been refuted. So valuing local sources more so than national sources, hard not to notice that the local folks here right now, as it relates to Todd Monken, have actually been pretty quiet. Apparently nobody knows enough yet to step up and say, oh, I don't believe there's any legs to this. I don't believe Todd Monken has any hope of going or any desire to go to the NFL. I don't think that's a thing. We haven't heard anybody say that. And the silence in this particular case is probably a little bit deafening. This is definitely a dog that isn't barking here right now. Now, to kind of put a little bit better spin on this, once again, going back to the idea of valuing local sources more so than national sources, I do think it's been interesting to see how this has been covered locally in Tampa compared to, what guys like Rapaport and Fowler have sort of said here. In fact, I read a story in the Tampa Bay Times about this yesterday, about exactly what they believe the Bucs and Todd Bowles in particular could be looking to do here as it relates to Todd Monken or their offensive coordinator job in particular. And there was one thing about this that I couldn't help but notice here is the people closest to this situation in Tampa also don't seem to really know what Todd Monken wants to do here. In fact, I think we have this on the screen. I can show to you the story from the Tampa Bay Times. Here, I'm just going to read a couple of sentences here. The Bucs going to begin an immediate search for Byron Leftwich's replacement. Among the candidates are former Alabama offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien. The former Penn State Houston Texans head coach was Brady's quarterback coach and offensive coordinator for 3 seasons in New England. The writer goes on to say Tampa Bay had discussion with O'Brien a year ago when they believed Leftwich might be hired as head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, the writer goes on to say Georgia offensive coordinator Todd Monken is a name to watch if he were to be willing to return to Tampa Bay at the same position he had going back to 2018. Now, in that handful of sentences, I think the word if is doing a lot of work there on behalf of the Tampa Bay Times. In other words, the people closest to this situation who are covering the Bucs on a daily basis, it certainly sounds like on the basis of what we just read right there, they very clearly believe that Bill O'Brien is interested in becoming an NFL offensive coordinator again. In fact, I think there's been some chatter here today that he might be on his way to becoming the offensive coordinator of the New England Patriots, which maybe makes the motivation to go out and get a guy like Todd Monken more profound for Tampa. But still, in terms of the contrast here, the people closest to this situation in Tampa seem to have a lot of belief that O'Brien is interested in the job. He interviewed for the job a year ago. The scuttlebutt we have here kind of at the college level would lead you to believe that maybe Alabama's ready to move off of Bill O'Brien and Nick Saban doing what he's done in the past, what he may have done with Pete Golding just a few weeks ago, kind of trying to find a new home for some of his coordinators he's not too happy with. That this may be kind of one of those situations in which it's very easy to assume that everybody knows what O'Brien wants to do. He sort of feels like he's worn out his welcome in Tuscaloosa, and therefore he's moving on. Now, whether he's moving on to Tampa, whether he's moving on to New England, it remains to be seen. But people close to this situation in the NFL seem to have a little bit more tangible proof that O'Brien definitely wants to move on, where they don't quite have that as it relates to Monken. But as I said before, while we don't have proof for sure that Monken wants to leave, we also don't have proof necessarily yet that he doesn't want to leave either. So if you're a Georgia fan, what do you do with all of this? I think you should take this seriously. I think you should follow. Now, there are plenty of reasons to think that a guy like Monken would want to go to the NFL. Obviously, a lot of coaches do. It's thought to be the highest level of the sport. There's also plenty of reasons to think that he might not want to go. Byron Leftwich, I don't believe, made anywhere near as much money in Tampa this year as Todd Monken did for Georgia. So there are maybe reasons that he would take the job. There are maybe reasons that he wouldn't. But in terms of this being a big old nothing, the kind of thing that's not worth your attention at all, I don't quite think that's the case. This is at least something worth following here, and hopefully we'll get some resolution sooner rather than later. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Happy to have you. The one thing I can't do today is laugh. When I laugh, and laughing at myself or how I sound is kind of an easy thing to do. The one thing I can't do right now is laugh, because if I do laugh, that's when I start coughing or whatever else. So I'm going to try to be very serious here right now and make sure I don't laugh, because that what sort of turns into a little bit of a coughing fit. If you're just joining us, I'm a little under the weather here today, as close to sick as I ever probably get. So we're at home. We're trying to do as much of a normal show as we possibly can. Thankful to have Jeff Sentell here coming up in just a little bit there as well. And by the way, big thanks to our friends at Kroger who make all this possible there too. And I'm guessing at some point in time, I'll maybe stop by my local Kroger and picking up some cough medicine or something like that. But Kroger also a great resource to have when it comes to saving money there too. You've heard us talking before about Kroger Boost. Well, here's we start 2023. It's time to kind of engage with and find out all more about what Kroger Boost is all about, because you can try Boost for free for 30 days. Now, you can save up to $1,000 when you get twice the fuel points and free grocery delivery. So This is a really good way. Everybody's right now trying to save as much money as they possibly can. This is a great way to do all of that. So go to Kroger.com/boost for more on that today. Kroger.com/boost for more on that today. All right, we're going to get Jeff Sentell here coming up in just a moment. I'll talk to him about the Monken stuff a little bit. We'll talk to him about what he thinks that Cedric Von Granger might do there too. And then we'll obviously get into some of the recruiting stuff that's out there right now as well. Before that, though, let's go around the DawgHouse, presented by Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. And I guess me being in the friendly confines of my home, kind of an appropriate thing today when we have Berkshire Hathaway Home Services presenting around the DawgHouse to us. I want to kind of roll through here for a moment some of the transfer portal stuff that's out there. We found out yesterday some dogs have gotten their new homes, and I want to kind of address some of this here a little bit. Starting with Arik Gilbert, I'll show this on the screen. As Hayes Fawcett from On3 has reported that Gilbert's committed to Nebraska. So another dog on his way to Nebraska here, and maybe more example of the fact that with Matt Rhule as head coach, Cornhuskers want to be a player for talent in a way they really kind of haven't been in the past. Now, I want to be real candid here for a moment. I think that the presence of Gilbert now on somebody else's roster is going to bring out a lot of questions on the part of UGA fans. For instance, if Gilbert goes on to have some success, a lot of folks will be wondering, well, how come that couldn't happen in Georgia? Which is, I guess, a fair question. We also talked a little bit this week about when guys leave Georgia, who do you feel comfortable rooting for, and who do you maybe not quite feel so comfortable rooting for at their new home. I don't mind telling you that Gilbert being in Nebraska is a guy that I can very easily cheer for and root for as he moves on to a new place. And my reason for that is pretty simple. And this is one of those things where, I don't always have the conversations with the people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. But in this particular case, I sort of feel like I have. And like the one thing I've had people tell me, because Gilbert's a guy that I'm really interested in. I think that Gilbert is one of the best high school players I've ever seen. He was if you're watching on video, you're watching some of that from him back when he was in high school. And this was a very polished route runner. This is a very special athlete. So Gilbert's always been a guy that I'm just really excited that he was on the Georgia roster, really wanted him to break out. So I was always really keen to kind of find out, hey, why is it that hasn't happened for him at Georgia? What's preventing that from taking place? And like the one thing that having had some conversations that I do truly believe wholeheartedly is that Georgia really tried to do right by Gilbert. And every sense that I get is that Gilbert really tried to do the right things while he was at Georgia. It clearly wasn't working out. Gilbert wasn't a guy that was able to play very much. Traveled a couple times to road games, got involved in the Vanderbilt game. But after being kind of one of the stars of G-Day, it just never quite happened for Gilbert on the field here this year. But as he moves on and goes to do something else, tries to find a new home in Nebraska, I really do think as a Georgia fan, you should have full confidence in knowing that not every experiment you participate in is going to be a successful one. And Georgia, I think, experimented with bringing a guy like, Gilbert into the fold here, and it just didn't quite work out. So he's obviously a guy that's dealt with a good number of personal challenges, and that's obviously been his own personal private journey to go through. And I think that Georgia tried to stand by him, tried to provide an avenue for him, just didn't quite work out. So, I hope he does have success in Nebraska. And if he does have some success in Nebraska, I don't think that's any kind of indication one way or another about what did or didn't happen here at Georgia. I believe both parties, Gilbert and the program, tried to do this the right way, and it just didn't work out. I'll also mention the fact that Trezman Marshall announced a new home yesterday. He is going to Alabama. Now, listen, I like Marshall, and I think that Marshall actually probably played this past year a little bit more than some people may realize. This is one of those guys that hadn't even been fully healthy the entire time he was at Georgia. There's a chance that his career at Georgia could have maybe turned out a good bit different than it has. But with Marshall announcing that he's going to Alabama, hard not to have the same, conclusion on this. And I've already heard some Georgia fans saying this, and I think it's probably the accurate reading. If you want to know how college football has changed, if you want to know how the sea change has taken place, an idea that a guy like Marshall, who's a talented player, and I'm sure Alabama will be very happy to have him. Georgia would probably love to have him as far as its depth goes there as well. But a talented player like Marshall, who looks at guys like Smile Mondon and Jamon Dumas-Johnson as the starters, you see these incoming freshmen, guys like C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson and Troy Bowles. You see these guys, whether it be coming into the program behind you or in the program ahead of you. The fact that a guy like Marshall says, hey, man, I'm a good football player. I deserve to be on the field. Let me go to Alabama so I can get some more playing time. I don't think anything in the world tells you how much things have changed in college football other than that. That's not mocking and making fun of Marshall, I'm sure. I'm sure Marshall will go on to have success there. And if Georgia plays Alabama this year, if Alabama's good enough to qualify to play Georgia, something they weren't able to do this past year, if Alabama was able to qualify for a chance to play Georgia, I'm sure that Marshall playing for Alabama could turn out to be a little bit of a problem. The kind of person that Georgia has to be aware of. But But in terms of how things have changed in college football, the idea that the path to playing time now easier at Alabama than it is at Georgia, hard not to notice that. I'll also point this out too. There was a tweet yesterday in light of Marshall going to Alabama from Glen Schumann. I've actually had some conversations with people in Tuscaloosa over the last couple of days about, hey, do you think Glen Schumann really come here? And like the one thing I've had to say back to the folks there at Alabama is the only thing that I know is that Schumann has continued to, ever since the first rumor came out there of possible replacement for Pete Golding, who's now at Ole Miss, Schumann's continued to recruit for Georgia. And maybe yesterday, kind of the final nail in the coffin for any Bama fan who was sort of hoping that Schumann might eventually arrive there. I'll show you this on the screen. Schumann had a very classy message for Trezman Marshall saying, there has been a year of my life since I came to Georgia where Trezman hasn't been a part of it. 3 years to recruit, 4 years to player. Glad we got this pick on Saturday. He's going to be missed. Love you. Go be great, Trezman Marshall. So pretty clearly, Schumann gives you a classy goodbye to Trezman Marshall. But every indication I think you have from that statement is that's Marshall kind of moving on to Alabama. And once again, like a couple of these social media messages have maybe alluded to previously, that every indication I think you get there is that Glen Schumann is staying right where he is at the University of Georgia, which I think obviously Georgia fans would view as very good news. Now, speaking of good news, let me give you one more thing here, and then we'll bring on Jeff Sentell after that. Do not lose sight of the fact that you also got a nice announcement yesterday from Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. And listen, any player of any note who announces he's coming back right now, in light of a lot of the players who sort of move on in this sort of transfer portal age that we live in, that's a guy that ought to deserve your attention here a little bit. And Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint yesterday kind of putting it out there on social media that he's ready to run it back for Georgia. And so if you're scoring at home here, Georgia brings back now 3 of its top 5 pass catchers for this previous season. Obviously, the 2 top guys, Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, now Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint too, who had a little bit better year than maybe some of you kind of realize. So when you think about the overall talent and skill level that Georgia has in its offense right now, this is about as much returning production, I think, at least, if I'm doing the math in my head correctly, this is about as much returning production as I think is we're kind of used to seeing Georgia have when it comes to some of its pass catching targets. So it's one of those things that sort of falls maybe between the cracks a little bit, given all the news that's out there. But Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint coming back to Georgia this upcoming season is the kind of thing that I think you got to pay attention to. And that is Around the Doghouse. Is presented today by Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. This is one of those things where, like normally in our regular studio, I turn to the side and kind of talk here a little bit to kind of give you the BHHS read, but we have no second camera here today, so I got to stay focused right where I am. And tell you that if it's time for you to kind of think about a real estate decision here in 2023, maybe selling a house that you're currently living in to get closer to something you want to be close to, like a brand new job or family members or good friends or whatever else, selling that house and buying that brand new home to make all those dreams come true for you, the folks at Berkshire Hathaway Home Service are ready to assist you on all of that. They are what I call transaction experts, because with offices all across our state, agents all across the place there as well, they're kind of going through this process on a daily basis. Now, here's the thing you got to understand about a good real estate agent. A good real estate agent understands that when you go under contract, that's not the end. In a lot of ways, it's just the beginning. The question you have to ask yourself is, how do you get from the signed contract to the closing table in a satisfactory outcome for both parties? That is what our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services are all about. So please make sure you find them online. BHHSgeorgia.com. That's BHHSgeorgia.com. And you can find Berkshire Hathaway Home Services today. All right, it is DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. We are at home. If you're just joining us, you kind of noticed I don't sound great, probably don't look great, a little bit banged up here today, as close to sick as I ever get. So we're not doing a real long show. If you're normally a radio listener, actually be preempted on the radio today, just because of my condition, if you will. So I appreciate you being patient. Hopefully by Monday, we'll be kind of back to normal. We don't like things not being delivered in their normal way. So we're looking forward to hopefully kind of getting through this one today and getting ready to go. Sounds like we're still looking for Jeff Sentell here there as well. So we'll catch up with Jeff here coming up in a moment. Let me just do this. I'll take a couple of comments here just for a second, and then we'll hopefully have Jeff Sentell kind of ready to rock and roll here too, and be able to kind of, maybe bounce out of there after that. Some of our normal stuff like SEC through and things like that, we'll kind of get back to that. Hermione McClain. Now, Colorado, we'll talk about some of what that means. So we'll kind of get into a lot of that here coming up in just a moment. Let me go back to DawgNation.com for a minute. Brad Hodnett says I'm running on adrenaline. He's going to crash after this. That may be the case. But listen, you got to understand something. I love doing the show. I mean, and Like you're going to have to pry the show out of my cold dead hands. I can promise you that. Johnny Surf Dog says Gilbert's a big, strong, fast athlete. But yeah, I mean, listen, no one disputes this. Eric Gilbert's dealt with some challenges, but it's not the kind of thing I blame Arik for any more than I'd blame myself for being sick right now. I mean, I just wouldn't. That's just kind of the way. That's just kind of the way that goes. Let me pop over to Facebook here for a moment. Let's see if I can pull up a couple of Facebook comments. This is a little earlier than we sometimes take Jeff, so he may be caught off guard by that a little bit. So over here on Facebook, just for a moment. By the way, for those of you who are normal commenters, we are not going to do like a regular cool down here today. I apologize for that, but we'll get back to normal one of those hopefully on Monday. Randy Payne checking in. Thank you from Tifton, Georgia, saying get better, BA. I appreciate that, Randy. Thank you so much. Let's see what else. Denise White Loper, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that too. Patsy Keith Johnson says, how much will Buster be missed too if Todd Monken leaves? Yeah, I mean, obviously it would seem like there are two obvious potential replacements for Monken if he were to move on. One of those is Buster Faulkner and one of those is Mike Bobo. And I realize that the Mike Bobo thing is one of those kind of lightning rods for discussion. Bobo was a lightning rod for discussion when he was here before. I get all of that, and I have to admit. While I like Bobo plenty, Bobo was not really successful in either of his last two offensive coordinator stints. That's just a fact. So I understand where some of that comes from. But you also see a guy like, say, Stacey Saros, who, and somebody mentioned this to me on Twitter yesterday, who I think a lot of Georgia fans had some questions about too. And I would say that the Georgia offensive line, when it was all said and done, had a very good year here this year. So, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Monken, I believe, has been a very instrumental part of Georgia's success. And if Monken were to leave, and I honestly don't know one way or another if he would or he wouldn't. I don't know that anybody does right now. If he were to leave, the discussion about his replacement would be a very, very serious conversation. It would, because there's a huge difference in what Georgia's done offensively post-Monken since he's been here and what it was doing offensively before he got here. And that's just a fact. Ryan Wilbank says, hey, how about you go out and get Cliff Kingsbury as your offensive coordinator? I saw where Kingsbury the other day, I guess he's going to Thailand or something like that. I'm not quite so sure when Kingsbury wants to coach again. I guess he's probably made a good bit of money. Sounds like he's going to be kind of living off the grid there for a little bit. But that is a sharp offensive mind. But it sounds like he may be off the grid there for a little bit. Dana Turk says, I don't think my nerves can take Bobo. So right now, this is just a hypothetical conversation because we don't know as of yet. If Georgia even has a needed offensive coordinator. And there's a very good chance they might not. But I will say, my only opinion on this, and this is not an endorsement, this is not anything, is I do think when you look at Bobo's last year, when you look at Bobo's last year's offensive coordinator here at Georgia in 2014, that was his last year's offensive coordinator. This is a very good offense. And as I said, what he did at Auburn, maybe you blame that on Brian Harsin, which you very easily could. What he did at South Carolina prior to that wasn't the same level of success. But if you told me that Georgia could have the 2014 Georgia offense, because remember, that offense, other than running back, was nowhere near as talented as this offense obviously is right now. So that's as deep into the hypothetical on Bobo as I could go. But I do think that when you go back and listen, as a fan, I'll be the first one to tell you when Bobo didn't give the ball to Gurley at the goal line in the South Carolina game, I was losing my mind back then. A lot of us were too. But a bad decision doesn't make you a bad coach, and the overall numbers for Bobo in 2014 were excellent. You can look this up and see the statistics for yourself. So we may get there and do more on that at some point in time if it becomes a thing that needs to be done. Let me bring in Jeff Sentell here right now. We'll call this On the Road with Jeff Sentell, assisted by AAA. So, Jeff, I obviously want to do some recruiting stuff with you here for a moment. I appreciate you kind of departing from your normal plan here and being with us via Zoom here today. Here's the one thing I said about the Todd Monken stuff before you join us, though, and I'm curious of your opinion, is that to me, local sourcing matters more than national sourcing does. And while the national people are out there talking about Monken as a possibility, it's what the local people say that matters more to me. In the case of the Tampa local media, it seems like they don't quite know if Monken's interested in this or not. But the Georgia local media, I haven't heard anybody else refute this, and that does matter to me a little bit because if this was easily falsifiable, it already would have been. So that doesn't mean that I think that Monken's going to the NFL, but it does mean that if you're a Georgia fan, you have to at least take this a little bit seriously, don't you?
Yeah, I think you got to take it seriously.
Jeff, you may be muted.
Brandon,
Jeff, you're not hearing.
Good morning, Brandon. Hope you're doing great. Way to
I can't tell if Jeff is mute. Okay, so I just can't hear him. So I'm not sure what that is. So this is going to be a tricky conversation. So Jeff, just give people your thoughts on that. I have no idea what you're saying here on this, and we'll see how we do this. So go ahead,
Brandon,
Jeff.
I'm going to make the most excellent point here regarding Todd Monken that any individual could ever make. You're going to nod your head a bunch of times. Obviously, I'm trying to be theatrical here, but really, Brandon, for me, the information here with Monken is like it's have things change. Number one, he is deliciously happy with what's going on at Georgia. He is on a run. You can't ask for more prolific offensive production that Georgia has put up under Todd Monken's watch, especially when you're looking at the wide receivers that he's had and had not had available. Here's something that I always think about with Todd Monken. When he took the job at Georgia, I was told he took the job at Georgia because he wanted to be a college head coach. Like he had his baptism and he'd had his laps around the pool in the NFL, being an offensive coordinator with the Browns and also with the Bucks. The Browns experience kind of soured him a little bit on the NFL. I think what he's looking for coming out of Georgia when he initially showed up was a platform that would spring him into a college job, an SEC job, an ACC head coaching job. I think he's really happy at Georgia. I think Georgia pays him a lot of money. I think Georgia gives him an environment where he never has to worry about the defense. And I think if Monken would have leave Georgia, Brandon, I think it would be for an enviable situation. I don't think Tampa is an enviable situation at all right now. No quarterback. You don't really know who the future quarterback is there. You hear the rumblings that Tom Brady is going to end up in Las Vegas playing for the Raiders or playing on the West Coast for the 49ers. All those things come to mind here. And I think that's why with Georgia and Monken, Brandon, sometimes when these jobs come open, the NFL guys, the national guys, just have to pop lists up. They have to pop names up. They have to say, this guy's a candidate, this guy's a candidate. Brandon, it's all theatrics through agents. And I think right now, I think that's what it is with Todd Monken. I don't think Tampa is the job that will have him leave Georgia. All right, guys. Well, we're going to try and do this right here. Here's what's coming up on DawgNation, DawgNation.com in terms of recruiting. You'll have an update coming up later today about Colin Simmons. Everybody knows him, nation's #1 edge linebacker. He took a recent visit to Georgia, and here's a Cliff Notes version of it. He only has one other school visit for him that ranks up there with the first initial visit to Georgia. That was an LSU visit. Kind of chimes in with what we're hearing about Colin Simmons. LSU is a major contender. I now pretty much listening to Colin Simmons this week, I feel that Georgia is now a major contender for Colin Simmons. That's a 6'3", 230-pound edge. Micah Parsons, the NFL Dallas Cowboy linebacker, has taken a very special interest in how well he's played. He's seen his game at the high school level. He thinks he has a bright future. You know, you're a good player when an NFL All-Pro, perhaps NFL Defensive Player of the Year, is talking you up. So I really like where Georgia's at right now with Colin Simmons. One of the things he said is probably 9 times out of 10, Georgia is now in the running, is going to get an official visit from a 5-star out of Texas. Really impressive there what Georgia's doing there with Chadiria Uzo-Deribe. His mom loved Georgia. He even told me he doesn't need to go back to Georgia anymore because he's seen everything he needs to see about Georgia, and it's excellent. Also, with everything going on with you've also got Sammy Brown we talked to this week. That's a story that's going to go up on DawgNation.com as well. The linebacker, the nation's #1 linebacker out of Jefferson High School in Jefferson, Georgia. I call him Captain America because he is just all around. Coach's kid, wrestling state champ, runs about 10.6, 10.7 in the 100 meters. Nation's #1 linebacker, 5-star, gets nothing but A's, great family. And somehow he looks at the Georgia linebacker room and sees opportunity and not, how in the world am I going to play with all those guys? How am I going to get up the depth chart? Sammy Brown looks at Georgia's linebacker room and how they stacked up depth at linebacker better than any program in the country in one position, except maybe Georgia at tight ends. That's a unique story from a young man that, you know, while the depth would say there's no way he's going to consider Georgia, he really likes what he sees in Georgia. Really liked another recent visit to Georgia. And I think Georgia's still very much in it with Sammy Brown, even though logic might dictate that when Sammy Brown shows up at Georgia, if he were to sign with Georgia, he might be #7 or #8 on the depth chart at linebacker. Doesn't bother him none. He doesn't bother him one bit. He likes the fact that if he chose Georgia, he would be in a room full of competitors and a room full of really great players.
All right. So, Jeff, can you hear me and see me now?
I can hear you. You're sideways, but I can see you. I can hear you.
For goodness sakes. All right.
How you doing, buddy?
Not great. Not great. So I'm not even sure what you're talking about before. Let me ask you this. How do you think the Monken rumor, one way or another, impacts the recruitment for a guy like, say, Dylan Raiola?
Well, I know Dylan Raiola and Georgia have gotten kind of cozy over the last couple months. One of the things I do know is that a lot of the recruiting has been handled by Mike Bobo over the last couple of months. That's a move there with Georgia that when you heard rumblings about Buster Faulkner and you heard Buster Faulkner, potentially looking at other jobs, I thought it was very wise for Georgia. I guess the proper word is to segue that relationship and to kind of have a new guy that was kind of running herd on that, like Rip in Yellowstone. I don't know if you watched that show, but the new Rip for Dylan Raiola was probably Mike Bobo, and we know Mike Bobo was the guy that recruited Matthew Stafford to Georgia, or as the Raiola family calls him, Uncle Matthew. I think Stafford is still technically his godfather, but you've got a guy there where Monken's pedigree and how well he's put up points, how well he's done with Georgia, especially with a guy like Stetson Bennett, where people got to think this, Brandon. If Monken can make Stetson Bennett, if Monken can get Stetson Bennett to New York and the downtown athletic club, think about what Monken can do and the Georgia offense can do with a talent like Dylan Raiola, Brandon. I don't know if I've said this on your program enough or at all, but you think about all the quarterbacks Georgia has recruited in the Kirby Smart era. Think of talent. Think of what they do. Think of how well they can spin the ball, make plays, improvisational. Dylan Raiola is a lot like Patrick Mahomes, or what Patrick Mahomes would look like if he was 17, 18 years old. He's got arm strength. Brandon, I don't know if you saw this, but when he went out to the Clarkson retreat last year and they had that long toss where you see how far a young man can throw it. Now, of course, I think that's really overrated in terms of a quarterback prospect. But what it does do is it measures arm strength. And Dylan Raiola threw it 72 yards as a rising high school junior. He's the #1 player in the country. He's going to give Georgia a visit, whether it's later this month or whether it's in March. And I think Raiola and Monken in Georgia, whatever happens there, I think Georgia has put together the risk management relationship insurance to make sure that the connection will still be strong.
You had a great story the other day with Edric Houston, who
Listen, I just think when you start thinking about the class of 2024, this is just such an exciting prospect, so exciting, kind of era for Georgia recruiting, because so many of these guys that Georgia, I think, really wants are close to home type guys. And I think for a lot of fans, it makes it more interesting sometimes when you're sort of pursuing a player that maybe you've seen on TV when we've done these games on Peachtree TV, or, they grew up kind of in your backyard, there with that. In the case of Houston, I thought your story was really good, but I also think it really identifies who's going to end up being one of the most important players for Georgia in this upcoming cycle. Now, listen, Georgia just got a great 2025 defensive end type player the other day that kind of sort of fits that Trayvon Walker mold. But if you can get a couple of guys that sort of fit that mold, you definitely want that. And that's what Houston, I think, would be for that class of 2024 as well.
Yeah, I don't think Georgia has a lot of 5-techs on the roster right now. That's why I think Arik Houston is great. He's rated as an edge still by On3, but he's rated as a defensive lineman, kind of a 5-tech right now for 24/7 Sports. And Brandon, he's about 6'4", 6'5" now. He's up to 265. We know this when a young man is 265 in high school, he's not going to get any slimmer. He's not going to trim it down. He's trending towards being a defensive lineman. Brandon, I'll just say it very simply, man. I think Arik Houston is the most important recruit for Georgia in the 2024 class. Dylan Raiola, going to tip the hat to that. 5-star quarterback, generational talent, all that. But you know what? Arik, just to me, he grew up in Atlanta. He grew up around Georgia Bulldogs in his family. When he was watching the Ohio State game, members of his family were rooting for Georgia. The Dogs want him really bad. And Brandon, I get the same vibes from Arik Houston that I got from Trayvon Walker, Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, Jalen Walker, Nolan Smith. He's just the type of young man, the way he's built, cares more about his teammates, cares more about playing inside the scheme, cares more about the work. Brandon, he's a 4x4 100 relay guy. He runs the 400 meters in high school track to stay in shape, work on his game. Brandon, nobody does that. No 5-star defensive lineman, defensive edge ever runs the 400. Now, Darius Smith has run the 100 and 200 because he is an incredible athlete.
Yeah.
But running the 400, that is a grown man's race. That last 100 meters of the 400, you literally feel like you've got Jordan Davis carrying a piano, carrying Big Bear Alexander on your back. It takes a very special athlete to do that. Arik Houston was also a wrestler. I just think the way Georgia's built, the way they continue to be built, you need players like Arik Houston.
So I don't know if you talked about this when we were disconnected a little earlier or not, but it's also getting away from recruiting here for a moment. It's also a day when we expect to hear the official news one way or another about Cedric Von Prine-Granger. It only seems like some of the online chatter has suggested that maybe he's considering returning. What do you think about this eventual decision? We obviously know if he were to come back, it'd be huge for Georgia. There's just not a lot of Cedric Von Prine-Grangers that are out there. That's pretty close to an irreplaceable player, I would say, in a lot of ways. So, what's your read on the situation as SVPG gets ready to make or at least have his decision known one way or another?
Yeah, I think he's been torn. I know he really loves Georgia. I know it's a family, Brandon, that values the Georgia degree, values education. Cedric he's a 5-star in every area. Captain, student, representative, player. Brandon, he has a chance if he comes back to be the starting center for 3 consecutive national championship teams. Unheard of. The way he's played, Brandon, the way he just stepped right in there against Clemson in 2021 and has been a pillar for Georgia. He's been a pillar for Georgia off the field. He's been a pillar for Georgia in the locker room. One of my favorite stories I'm going to write sometime is what Kirby Smart said after the championship about how it kind of felt like 92 Barcelona and the Dream Team, and how Georgia's #1 offense went against Georgia's #1 defense. And that was, let's say it, Brandon, that was the most competitive football Georgia played all year long. And he said Cedric Von Prine and Team Run led the offense. Jalen Carter and Team Run ran the defense. And those guys almost killed each other. And Kirby's a guy that loves competitiveness, loves ways to stoke the fires of his young men. And he's like, maybe we need to back off this just a little bit. This is a little bit crazy. I think Cedric Von Prine, whatever he does, I think DawgNation should stand up. They should clap. They can say whatever that young man is doing for his family, that's the best thing for him and his family he needs to do. But, Brandon, if he comes back to Georgia, some of those offensive line question marks will go away if they have Von Prine-Granger in the middle.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Jeff, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate you kind of staying patient with us, too. A little bit of an unusual situation. Look forward to talking to you again under normal circumstance, hopefully very soon. And we just appreciate your time and talk to you later on.
Hey, Brandon, hope you get well, buddy. And, man, we just had our 4th quarter against Ohio State. Little rocky there. We came through, and we finished on a great note, man. Get well, brother.
No doubt about that, Jeff. Thank you so much. So good stuff there from Jeff Sentell. That's On the Road, assisted by AAA. We obviously appreciate Jeff Sentell for being a part of that. In fact, AAA makes this possible for us each and every week here on the program. And I am certainly grateful for all of that from them. In fact, AAA, a great name to know for you when you think about your auto insurance there as well, because you can get something and even more than you would expect when it comes to our friend at AAA. You might even pay less for that. You get a free, no obligation quote for AAA auto insurance, and you can see if you can qualify for that AAA membership discount. It's a paperless discount or a pay in full discount, or maybe even the multiple car savings as well. There are lots of different ways for you to save with our friends at AAA. So make sure you give them a call, 833-718-2075. That's 833-718-2075 to find a branch near you. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get ready to wrap things up today because, at this point I'm on the phone and who knows how this is even going out. So, we got a cruise coming up. Y'all check out rolldogs.com, be a part of that. My bookie, find them online. Get a bet down on the divisional round playoff games here this weekend. Use the promo code DawgNation for that. We'll give a shout out here to our friends at the Finish Long Drink for our big finish. They had a funny tweet the other day, kind of looking at some folks enjoying that delicious Finish Long Drink. A lot of you have tried that. In fact, we'll show this to you on the screen. A lot of you have tried that there as well. If you haven't, as our friend Bev the Barbarian says, if you haven't tried that, well, you can here right now. Just simply go to thelongdrink.com and put your zip code in. You can find out where you can pick some up today. And trust me when I tell you, it'll be really, really good. Whether it's the cranberry flavor, the grapefruit flavor, which is kind of the traditional in the blue can, Long Drink 0, no carbs, no sugar, Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Make sure you check all of that out. Also, as we get ready to say goodbye here, there as well, our buddy Mad Dog sharing a golden shoe with us there as well, kind of making fun of Jaden Rashada and the situation there in Florida. As Florida misses out on their big quarterback signee, as we talked about yesterday, you start moving ahead to the upcoming spring practice. It is not a good situation with Florida quarterback right now, which is one of the reasons they may have been quite so desperate on the Rashada thing. So funny stuff from Mad Dog there. And, of course, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, we'll remind you that Georgia goes back to Jacksonville very, very soon. In fact, 281 days from right now to get a win right there against those lousy, stinking Gators. Y'all have a great weekend. Trust me when I tell you, we'll be back to normal on Monday. So thanks for your patience here today, and we'll talk to you again then. And on video, time now for the RS Andrews cool down. RS Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. We're not going to do comment stages because it's kind of a mess here a little bit. So appreciate your patience. Sorry it was a little bit different. If the Vamp Run thing breaks, we may pop back on video for that later on today. But we'll try to see if we can shake all this off and be back to doing this again normal on Monday. So you'll have a great weekend, and we'll look forward to talking to you then.